James Rubin provided us with an enlightening, though maybe not entirely reassuring, perspective from the US. As a European, if I look at the US during this year of presidential campaign, I find myself very much at home. I believe that we see in the US the political process at large a number of features that are very, very similar to the ones we are seeing at play in most of our European countries. Short-termism, more and more short-termism in the political perspective, a widespread rejection in the public opinion of competence and experience as basis for policy making, a growing mistrust in public institutions and public personalities, which in the case of Europe is very visible as regards the declining trust in the European institutions, but it is even more declining vis-à-vis domestic political institutions. And I believe that the main victim of this evolution, some might call it degeneration of the political process domestically in each of our Western democracies, is that international integration is the chief victim of all this. Disintegration, or at least less integration than in the past, is today visible even within member states, within nation states, Catalonia, Scotland, and many other cases. It is visible at the global level. The pace of integration as measured, for example, by trade liberalization has been going down and even went back if we take the WTO as an observer. And of course, we see also a tendency towards disintegration, or at least much less appetite for integration than was there in the past within the European Union. Now, out of this catalogue of slightly political misery are countries that we would not qualify as Western democracies, like China, like Russia. And they, by default, are more and more given by this division of roles the task of caring about integration project. Western nor democratic country is just about the only country which really looks at the long term in the formulation of its policies. They actually consider at this time a reasonable medium, even than long-term objective, the situation of China in 2049, when the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Revolution might occur. Russia and China, I was saying, also the task of being, in a sense, the new integrators, just economic development effort many countries in the Eurasian continent. Whereas in our part of the world, which does include, in a sense, because there are huge responsibilities of the US and of the European Union in the Mediterranean basin at large, integration is suffering. Integration is moving backwards, or at least there is this risk. I believe that in the case of the European Union, this integration might be a concrete risk, and I fear not so much disintegration through separation, but disintegration through implosion. Disintegration through separation would be Grexit, would be Brexit. In spite of many hot uncertainties in these areas, I still believe neither will happen, but this is very debatable. Disintegration by implosion, on the other hand, would be not a geographical disintegration of some components from the rest of the EU, but more worrying, a disintegration from within, a disintegration from growing mutual acrimony between the people and the authorities, the people and the establishment, with each national government now being more and more driven by very short-term incentives, by the transformation of so-called political leaders into political followers, whose main ambition is to influence not even the next election, which may be 2 or 3 years away, but the next public opinion poll next week. And in the case of the EU, these 28 ladies and gentlemen go each month, more or less now, to Brussels, and they supposedly take decisions in the European Council, in the top political body of the EU, in the common interest of the EU, which I believe they might even believe they are doing, but in fact they are driven not even by national interest in many cases. That would still be a good solution, because in the long term the national interest of a EU member state tends to coincide with the interest of Europe, but they are driven by sometimes explicitly stated party political or personal political objectives, purely in terms of the domestic context. This is something that brings me to believe that we had in the past, after World War II, an extremely virtuous circle between two concepts, democracy and integration, with the integration process, particularly in Europe, driving the advent and the consolidation of many formerly non-democratic countries into the process, Greece, Portugal, Spain, Central and Eastern European countries, and so on and so forth. This may no longer be there, and if we were to conclude that the present trends of the way in which the political game played out in countries is such that integration becomes a luxury, because integration requires vision for the long term, requires ability to understand advantages coming in an indirect, in a long-term way. In other words, integration is the predestined victim of all the nationalistic and protectionist speeches that can be done, can shock the audience with 10-second slogans, whereas the cause for integration will require, if one is very good, 1 or 2 minute argumentation, which is much too long to win an election or a poll. Well, in this context, I believe that as a long-term task, we either save our democracies from impotence, from mistrust from the public opinion itself, and as a derivative, we also save the integration process, or else, if our democracies are more and more shaky, then we are going to lose democracy and integration. Just a word against this background, which might seem to be not exceedingly optimistic, but I think that the sooner we go deep into the causes of the present crisis, the more we have a chance to be able to overcome it. Concerning this part of the world, concerning the Mediterranean basin, in a nutshell, I believe, and I speak also as an Italian, not just a European, that Europe as a whole is now paying the price of a partly inadvertent but huge bias. For historical reasons, we have for 20 years devoted enormous political and financial energies to the further integration of Europe to the Central and Eastern European countries, with two geographical exceptions like Malta and Cyprus. All this has come inevitably to the detriment of a more balanced out-of-area attention, and also, we must admit it, because of the smaller power of traction of EU common decisions by Mediterranean member states than has been the case for Germany, for example, we have left the south relative to Europe, so the northern rim of the Mediterranean, and the southeast relative to Europe, that is the Middle East, very much unguarded from the point of view of embracing them in a longer-term vision, including the synergies with Europe. And we are paying this price because the difficulties that now the EU is showing in coping with phenomena which are coming very largely from this region of the world in terms of refugees, migrants, and so on, are proving to be not only very difficult to treat in themselves, but are proving to be, at least for a while, inputs of disintegration, because they are bringing EU member states to antagonism, to acrimony with each other. The case of Italy and Austria in these days is just one case in point, but obviously is also historically quite amazing to see that may be coming up. And so I believe that unless with a huge effort the European Union, with some cooperation with the US, is able to really have an outreach of investment and favor to growth in Africa and the Middle East, it will become more and more antagonized between the North and the South within the European Union, and also more than we might ever have expected between the West and the East European countries. So if to elicit political energies we need big challenges, and if the EU has always been able to overcome challenges and develop itself in that way, at this time we are extremely lucky because we are presented with an unprecedented menu of combined challenges. Thank you very much.
Mille grazie, Mario. In fact, of course, you did go over time a little bit, but I felt that I could not possibly stem the flow